do a little like Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of Creation of Anatomy. I'm your co-host, Eric Valero.
I'm Sarah Holcraft.
And we are discussing page 23 through 28 today. And that is Pope John Paul II's Carmelite personalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do the conversation he had about St. John of the Cross, which was very, very interesting. So if you're reading along with us, God bless you. Because that was an interesting little read right there.
Yeah. And it's been a while since we've done a podcast, so
rusty.
Yeah. Well, it's been like a week, but it's hard when you're not reading something like the day after, remembering what came before.
Yes. So if you want a little recap of what came before, there was the, I believe, scripture interpretations, right? The reading of scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Translation.
Yep. Literature genre, intended audience, authority.
Yeah.
So hope you all read that.
Yeah. Nothing too big.
Mm-hmm. So what have you been up to the past few days?
Well, we've been pretty busy. We tried to podcast earlier, but we went to a movie on Friday in the city. We watched Dead Man's Chest, on the Intrepid, which I've never heard of before, but it's like it used to be
like a military lander.
Yeah. So they're like old airplanes on it.
Yeah. I went when I was a kid with my grandfather when I was maybe 11. He loved it.
Loved it? Did you love it?
I mean, I thought it was really cool.
Okay.
I used to watch military movies with him all the time when I was a kid. And I feel like it's one of those things where I liked it because he liked it.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
That's funny. That's like usually it's swapped. The adult takes the kid somewhere.
Yeah. I don't know. We were buds. But it was cool seeing it again.
Yeah.
Whatever, 20 years later now.
Yeah. It was fun. I'd never been. And I thought it was so funny. The movie was Dead Man's Chest, Pirates of the Caribbean. I thought it was so funny that people got up and left 10 minutes in because it started sprinkling just a little bit.
Their delicate skin. Oh, goodness. Yeah, and then we are the winners of a spike ball tournament.
That's true. And it was only your third time playing, right?
It was, yep.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
We have that chemistry.
I know. We played our friends who are married. One of them is pregnant. And they almost beat us.
It was 3-on-2. So
I guess. But she really... and she played 3 other games after that.
I was blown away. Because that was... I was huffing and puffing.
It was such an intense game. I was like, is she okay?
Oh my goodness. That was great. And good quality plays.
Yeah.
It wasn't sometimes you get some points and you're like, we earned every point we got.
Yeah,
and they did
it's
too.
True. It's true. It was a good game. So, busy weekend. But here we are.
Yep. You got your book?
I have my book. Not open, but...
So, the first part, he kind of is just teeing up his conversation he wants to have about his interpretation of St. John of the Cross, that first section.
Yes, which I actually... we were talking earlier today, or yesterday, about how... No, it was today. We were talking earlier today about how oftentimes people... we live our lives like we're the main character. And it's not really reality because although, yes, we are, the main character in our own lives, we're still part of a greater story where we're all characters in each other's lives. And I realized something that came up on page 23. He says, first, God wills human beings for their own sake, for their good. And it reminded me of something I was thinking earlier about how I often think about when God puts people in my life, why is it that he puts them in my life? What is it that he wants to say to me? What is it that he's trying to show me? Like that lady yesterday who stopped me when I was walking Fendi, I was like, what is it that she, like God's trying to tell me through her?
Mm-hmm.
And then today I was thinking about the fact that that's very main character of me to think, which it's true, God does put people in my life for me and for my good, but he also puts me in other people's lives and their story for their good. And I think I don't take that responsibility.
Right. You might have initially thought, what is she in my life for? But maybe the question might have been, what are you in her life for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is it that she needs to hear? And I think that's important because if you think about like what minor characters, what role they play in the main character's life, is that they often make the main character realize something. Yeah. And whether it's bad or good, but I think I have a lot of conversations with people.
Like a catalyst.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I have a lot of conversations with people where nothing's really realized. It's just like, I don't know, a little small talk. And
maybe,
I think there could be
like
a lot more depth.
Slight nudge.
Yeah.
In a direction, kind of like an asteroid, if it's on course to hit the Earth.
Yeah.
Getting a little sciencey here, but like if you knock it off course a millimeter, and it was going to hit the Earth in 2 years, that little error compounds and compounds and compounds, and then it'll actually completely miss where it would have been dead on to hit. They actually proved that. It was called the DART mission.
DART mission?
They actually crashed spacecraft into this asteroid that they could map its course, right? Not that it was going to hit the Earth, but they could map its course. And they proved that the anticipated location it was going to be at a certain date was altered by X amount because of it hitting and just knocking it ever so slightly off course. And that trajectory change made the asteroid be in a totally different place years later.
Yeah.
Right? And like, who knows? Like maybe what you're saying with these little shifts, right? They're not like some like, I see that big change, this person changed my life when I talk to them.
True.
It's this little shift that puts you in a totally different place when you need to be.
That's true. But sometimes I think like we are put in a place to make a big shift in people's lives and we don't take it. Like I think a simple example is when somebody's making a really bad decision. We know it's a really bad decision.
Yeah.
And we don't say anything.
Right. And why don't we say anything? Like, right, is the reason why because we're not sure if it is or not? Like I think that is a big factor, is that sometimes you're like, I don't know, I don't want to be blamed when they regret because I begged them not to do it and they regret listening to me.
Yeah.
Right? But like I think that sometimes you're positive it's the wrong and the thing is, that's why I think perspective is better than advice, because I think that's like you could use a little Socratic seminar with them. And the thing is that at the end of the Socratic seminar, when you ask them some questions to really figure out and discern if it is the right decision or not, they'll make the decision on their own. And I think that's more of a gentle nudge to put them on course. Who knows? That's kind of a whole little lifetime in that little conversation you might have, that totally changes everything.
That's true.
It's interesting. And I wanted to look up what that word from that YouTube video, the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows.
Yeah, explain what the definition is.
So the I don't even remember what the word is, but the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows was a YouTube channel from the Discovery Channel. Actually, it was an offshoot of it, and it was they made up words. Sometimes they were like Latinized words, and sometimes they were just very strange. Like, I don't know where they got the words from. But they were made up, but the definitions, you knew this definition, right? You just didn't know there was a word for it because there wasn't a word for it, right? One of the coolest ones is, I think it's called sonder. It's the feeling you get when you enter into a space that's usually bustling with life, but is now empty, right? Like a school auditorium, like after a play, or like Grand Central Station if like it got shut down or something like that, right? But this one, I forget the word. I should have looked it up. But it was the idea that you are both a main character in your life, but everybody else that's walking around might feel like minor characters in your life, but you're a minor character in their life.
Yeah.
To which they're a main character.
And I like the point that you made earlier when we were talking about this, that although it's called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, oftentimes sorrow has a negative connotation because it's sad.
Yeah.
But I think when even thinking about those two examples that you made, they're not necessarily like, they are sad, but also like calming and sobering and almost like a good reality check.
Reality check, yeah.
Yeah. Which is like hard and can be sorrowful, but there's something.
There's almost something communal in sharing the feeling.
Yes, because knowing someone else feels it too is huge, yeah.
Right, because, I mean, it feels like such a personal feeling, right? Like I'm the only one that feels this way, and then you realize that other people feel that way as well, and it's like, wow, that's a reality check. Like we are so one together in that way.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of those realizations as we're reading Theology of the Body, because just in the little I know of Theology of the Body, every time I learn something, and to be honest, every time I learn something about the Catholic faith in general, it puts words to feelings that I didn't know how to express, or didn't know that other people felt them too.
Right.
Or maybe didn't even know I was feeling, and then it's said, and which is why I think saints are so important.
Right, yeah.
Which I know is a big topic today when we get into section B about St. John of the Cross. But I find that saints, I love reading the writings of saints because they're so honest about their own experiences.
Yeah.
And despite how mystical they might be, or how holy they might be, or how different their life might be, something about their authenticity and their honesty relates to my own life and my own journey with God.
Like an obscure sorrow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, for real.
I find that with like C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Right? Is that like, I think C.S. Lewis said something like, I'm not sure if he's the first one to say this, but he says something like, if you crave something beyond this world, right, that means that you weren't meant for this world, right? You can't want something that you can't have in this world. If that means that indicates that you must have been meant for something greater than this world.
Yeah.
And like, that's like one of those things that like when I was a kid, I'm like, why do I want to like go out into outer space somewhere? Why do I want to like I want to explore so much more than this world. And it just feels like I'm not meant for here, So
yeah. And it's weird because you almost feel crazy because everyone else seems like satisfied and content.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I must be some sort of freak, alien, whatever.
Oh yeah, I felt like an alien for a while.
This is why, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but it will come up many times in this podcast. I love Twilight because I find that it's a good analogy for people's conversion experiences.
Really?
Because a lot of what Bella experiences before meeting Edward is that she's awkward, she doesn't belong in like this human world. And when she meets Edward and starts to understand his like vampire world, things start to make sense to her. Like, oh, like this is what I was made for, basically. Obviously, vampires and werewolves don't exist, and it's like kind of a silly story, whatever. But I think I love it because it does speak something to that experience of I don't belong here, and meeting Jesus, I realize, oh, I belong with him.
It's interesting you say that, not being a convert.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's interesting because, like, knowing what it's like not believing or not, like, owning up to the fact that you probably do believe that God exists. The world doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And the world doesn't even, like, to go one step further, the world doesn't feel as if it could make sense. Right? Like, there's one thing to not understand something, but then to not even understand that it could be understood, that's just chaos, right? And there's no living in that. I remember that was just, it's not a sustainable way to live.
Yeah.
And the only coping mechanisms after that.
Right. One of my friends has a really good analogy for her experience not believing in God and then coming to the faith. She compares it to a rosary and how she feels like like there were so many pieces of her life and things that would happen in her life that her life felt chaotic. It felt like all these beads all over the place. And once she started to learn about God and get to know God, it's like they all started to come together. All of these things about her life, she started to understand like why this happened, or why she met this person, or even just like why she's feeling this way.
Yeah.
And
I feel like that visual in my head is something that I feel like I've used something similar to understand it, because it feels like, now this is not in a religious context, but in, like, let's say like a medical context.
Yeah.
Right? I find that a lot of people, especially nutrition or something that's relevant to most people's lives, they have what I call like a knowledge archipelago. Right? It's just a bunch of beads, right? Little islands of knowledge, and there's just no underlying foundation underneath it that, like, holds them all together. And then they might not all be true at the same time. Right? And they might be true on different levels even, like some may be like much more profoundly true, and some might be technically true with, and then by studying the basics, you start to understand in an inductive way the mainland now, right? Or like the rosary, the full rosary, as opposed to it be a bunch of scattered beads. Yeah. The rosary is one whole thing. So, like, I totally get that visual.
Yeah. And to be honest, meeting you helped me, like, your nutrition example. Like, being on social media, seeing like YouTube shorts or TikTok videos, or I feel like people hear a lot of just short
sound bites.
Yeah, exactly. This is a fact, and this is how it works. And whether or not it is true, it's confusing because I don't understand why it might be true, and I don't actually know what to trust. But the way that you teach is helpful because you lay a foundation, and then you start to explain, like, and this is why that happens, or this happens.
I try to, whenever I'm explaining to a patient something, like, I'm not trying to be one of those soundbite people, right? If I'm telling somebody, like they ask me a question, and then I give them the answer, I'm like, I don't feel good about you just believing me. Right. You know what I mean? I don't feel good about that because, like, you're I mean, it's good that they trust me. Right. But I always feel this nagging necessity to flesh out the explanation so that not only do they believe me because I said it, but they also understand why it's the case, right? And how they would have come to the same conclusion had they known the foundational information I tell them, right? I'll pull out my anatomy app and be like, look at this is the case here. Don't you see that this is how the anatomy is? And they go, well, that seems pretty obvious that this is true. Right. And then what I always just hope is that, like, let's say they were to go home and say, like, oh, this is what this doctor that I went to said about this situation, right? I would hope that they would be able to go, yeah, I understand it now. Let me explain it to you. And then it passes on, like, with high fidelity, like a high fidelity copy of it, right? Because I think you're playing telephone tag with these little factoids, and then all of a sudden, like, you get this obscure warping of the original fact, and that was the reason why it doesn't copy well, and it has a very low fidelity copy rate, is because the person doesn't understand in the first place, and things are going to vary as you do it when there's not some central, like, principle that you're basing it off of, that you can kind of always go back and check and make sure to make sense to this principle in every direction, right? If it doesn't have to fit a principle and it could just kind of morph into whatever it wants to be, it will morph. There's nothing pulling it back.
Yeah. This is why I have a hard time talking about faith with people sometimes, because I don't actually know where their base is and how much they do know, or how do they know certain things, and what they know. Do they know what's accurate? Do they have some false information? And it's definitely why I don't recommend, like, we were talking about St. John of the Cross earlier, and I would never just tell somebody, like, read St. John of the Cross, because that could be kind of detrimental for their conversion if there's some sort of misunderstanding, or because I almost had that experience when I first read Story of a Soul, and I was trying to get through Saint Therese, and I don't necessarily know what I was lacking, but as a freshman in college, it, like, wasn't the place I was at, and so I just had to put it down. I'm glad I did, because I don't think I wouldn't have left the faith or anything, but I think it would have been really hard for me to receive what she said, and I think I would have had more of a mistrust of saints.
Right, shoehorning something that's very difficult to put into your worldview into your worldview. Yeah, that is tough. I also find this is something that I find that gives me some stress when I study, is that, like you were saying, that you had to put the book down. Sometimes I do that because sometimes I will study something, like right now I'm studying a lot of pharmacology, right? And they'll get a section, especially when it gets into, like, some of the physics, because I'm not as good on physics, and I'll just go, maybe I'll come back to this, and then I'll just keep moving on. It's like, will I go back to it? You know what I mean? Like, and then it's more just like, but there's the other end, is that, will this just stop me from studying the rest of this because I get so bogged down on trying to figure this out here? So I think there's a lot of that give and take in that.
Do you feel like you have a need to go back? Because I know some people just in general have a hard time, like, they have to finish a book. If they started it, they have to finish it.
Well, it depends. Like, when it's a textbook, I find that I have a goal of what I want to be able to be proficient in speaking to patients about their medication, because a lot of them talk to me about that, right? And I find that that's my goal, right? And the pharmacokinetics of dosage based off of excretion, right? It's like, is that part of learning pharmacology? Sure. Like, being able to understand these complicated math problems and stuff like that. It's like, I'm not going to be a pharmacologist. I'm not doing this. I'm not studying it to become a pharmacologist. And then there's an arrogance to that, because then it's like, do I want to just be able to say, oh, I understand this to that level? It's like, no, I'm doing this because a lot of patients express to me that they have these issues, and I have a decent set of knowledge on pharmacology, right? Like I usually am able to speak pretty evidence-based when they tell me something, but I don't want to be lacking in that. And that's my goal.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't mind passing over it, because I always have to just kind of ask myself and just discern whether, why am I learning this?
Right, yeah.
Right? Why am I putting this into my brain? And if it's hard, this is something that I've noticed, is that sometimes things just pour into your head. Like a good song, right? It's stuck in your head, right?
A good song or a catchy song?
A catchy song. We talked about this, right? A catchy song. But I think that I forget who said it. I could be wrong. I'm not going to say who I think said it, but somebody said this. They said, interest is a spirit that moves from place to place as your knowledge deepens and grows. I believe that's the quote, right? And it's interesting because it's kind of an idea that your interest is not something you choose. It kind of chooses you. It's kind of like the Holy Spirit telling you, cast your eyes in this direction, right? Because something of value will be here. And it's almost like when there's an ease of the information transfer into your head is a good sign that the Holy Spirit is telling you to look there. You know, like, because I think that's why I started picking up pharmacology, was because, and I when I tell you, I absorb it like crazy, because I see that necessity, that lacking, that I want to be able to give perspective on that, you know? Because the thing is that like I'm not allowed to give pharmacological advice to people, but I can give perspective. I can give information. Absolutely. I can't tell you take this medication over that, but I can absolutely give you perspective. And when I find that that's something that I'm lacking, and it's something that I could be helpful with, it's like my brain goes, eat all this up, you know, like take it all in and like stamp it with a high memory recall, you know? And that's that like level of interest, right, is really, it's just, I don't know, it just feels like where the Holy Spirit
we should notice it, be more sensitive to
it.
Yeah. I even feel that not in an educational learning capacity, but even in hobbies or careers or something. I think I was thinking earlier today about just like random jobs that I've had in the past, and how they would have never been jobs that I would have picked for myself. Firstly, they were definitely opportunities that God placed in front of me, and I'm glad I took them, because it opened up a whole new world for me, where I was interested in all these things that I would have never, like working at a special ed school, I would have never thought that like I wanted to learn sign language. But after working with nonverbal kids, it feels like the most important thing that you could do is learn sign language, teach them sign language, and be able to talk to them, communicate with them.
And that comes along with a lot of things, whether it's like you move to a new country, and it's like people always say like, and I think people think it's the immersion effect. I think it's the necessity. I think people go, oh my goodness, I really got, like, and your brain realizes like when you really need the information, your brain will listen to you and will make it easier to recall. I don't think it's as hard to learn a language as people think. I think the main reason why people don't learn a language is because you really don't need to. It's the same thing with like muscles, right? Is that like if you really don't need to use a muscle, it won't fire. You know what I mean? And I think that it goes both ways. And then what you even say about sign language. Most parents, they try to learn sign language, they're gonna be like, all right, like I tried, you know. I remember a couple of things. And you have a deaf child now, and it's like you're gonna learn sign language. You will.
I mean, right after I left the special ed school, like I had bought a textbook and everything, and I was studying it. But after I left,
but you left, right?
And it wasn't necessary anymore. And like, although there's still like that desire there, it's not awakened anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, hopefully someday, but
yeah, right.
We'll see.
So, do you want to tee off the Saint John of the Cross, like even the quote from?
Oh, his quote.
Saint John of the Cross's quote, yeah.
Right. Well, I have a lot of notes even before that.
Oh, you want to? Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I just really like I was really into the way that he was writing about JP2's relationship with St. John of the Cross, because I think that I don't think we utilize the saints as much as we could. And I think because a lot of people, they feel like, oh, I only have to pray to God. It was just like, true. Like, God hears you.
We talked about it on the first podcast, yeah.
Yeah. But I like that it's even more than just like praying to St. John of the Cross, but it says like he had a profound encounter with St. John of the Cross. Like St. John became a friend to him, a master to him. And I think to be honest, that kind of gives words for me the way that I experience like certain relationships or encounters with saints is I can't say that they came to me or something, like they didn't come to me in a dream or whatever, they didn't talk to me, but for some reason I feel like I know them.
Yeah.
And I feel like they know me.
Well, that's kind of what we were saying about those distal role models.
Right, you know, yeah.
Is that, I mean, if you've watched somebody and watched how they act, how they react, more importantly, to different situations, you start to develop this model of, like, what would this person do in this situation? And you can kind of play out what you would imagine they'd do.
Right.
And then you have a bit of a map of what you, and it almost feels like you do know them. It almost feels like you had an encounter with them.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think, although we were talking about how saints, they disagree with each other sometimes. They're very different personalities, very different impacts they had on the world, whatever. I still feel a sense of unity between all of them, like whenever I read something that they wrote. And I think it's an encounter with the saint, but more so it's an encounter with God through the saint. Like, I think that unity that they have within each other is God.
Right, they're a proxy for God.
Yes, and I think I know that I can trust them because I've had an encounter with God, and the encounter I had with them I can recognize was an encounter with God. It was the same sort of encounter.
Right.
Which is why reading all of the writings from St. John of the Cross, pretty hefty.
Yeah.
But I know that there's something good here. Not just because it's St. John of the Cross, but because JP2, he took a lot from him.
And well, he learned Spanish just to interpret, which is, I mean, to be honest, I think that was a lot of the issue must have been a translational thing. But like we were even saying that about the necessity to learn a language.
Right.
I didn't even realize we said that, and we were talking about that's what he talked about.
And JP2 felt that necessity. I think he read St. John of the Cross in Polish, whatever. Yeah. And he knew that he had to understand it.
And you know what? I would bet, not that I think it was easy for him to learn Spanish. I bet it was not something he dreaded.
Right.
Like, he didn't have to go, oh man, you know what? It's 5:00. Let me go get my Spanish book out now and study it. You know, it was probably something that he was dedicated to do because he saw the necessity, because he really wanted to understand St. John of the Cross's writing.
Yeah.
Which I have to say, I mean, like, if I really wanted to understand his writing, like, I could absolutely see how there's almost a necessity to learn Spanish.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, because even what you were saying, there's messages in the manner in which he writes, not necessarily the content in which he writes.
Right, yeah.
Right, and like it was hard And I have to say, maybe JP2 is a proxy to God. Mm-hmm. Being that I and you kind of were too, is your interpretation of this, mm-hmm. explaining it to me, was much better than me reading this firsthand. And this is supposed to be a proxy to God in the first place.
Right.
So,
and just to summarize, I don't think we have to read the whole passage from St. John of the Cross, but St. John is basically saying that God gives himself to us, right? And everything that we have, everything that is good in us is God. We have God within us. And the only proper gift that we can give God is God himself. Right. And God happily receives
everything that he gave us.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So the idea is that God is being given to himself and gives back to himself within us.
I love how you said that, because it makes sense.
That's the summary of it.
Can I read the way he says it?
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult.
I mean, and if you're reading along, then maybe you also read it and were very
page 27.
Confused.
It is conscious there that God is indeed its own, and that it possesses him by inheritance, with the right of ownership, as his adopted child through the grace of his gift of himself. Having him for its own, it can give him and communicate him to whoever it wishes. Thus it gives him to its beloved, who is the very God who gave himself to it. By this donation it repays God for all it owes him, since it willingly gives as much as it receives from him. Now, having read that paragraph, I would say close to 7 times now, I absolutely have come to your exegesis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, and it's an exegesis when you explain it and you read on the next page.
Yeah.
Pope John Paul II very elegantly say the same thing you just said, right?
But this is interesting. So as we read this and JP2 repeated it in a way that we could understand it, it's making me wonder about how important saints are, not just to discover new things about God, but even to rediscover things that have been forgotten, mm-hmm. or misunderstood. Or because, to be honest, like St. John of the Cross, he's writing in the 1500s, something like that. And so even the way that he talks is different. The way that people wrote back then was different.
Sure.
And
you'd barely understand English if you heard it from back then, let alone Spanish translated into modern English.
And it makes me wonder, like, the importance of saints, to translate saints from before. And not to say that we could still read saints from long ago. Like, people still read St. Augustine's City of God, but sometimes it's helpful to read what saints say about other saints, because maybe they are there to translate things that we wouldn't understand.
Well, I think we were just talking about this, and we touched on the same podcast, but there's another it's a YouTube channel, mm-hmm. But it was about philosophy, right? And his way that he understood philosophy and the way he studied philosophy is that, if you want to read Kant, mm-hmm. Kant's hard.
We're going to get to him.
We're going to get to him, right?
Yeah.
But he's hard. I've tried to read his work. And somebody even asked me, they're like, you're into philosophy. Like, what book would you suggest by Kant? I'm like, probably a book about Kant.
Right. Yeah.
Like, find a book that's like the I don't know, the collection of Immanuel Kant's work explained or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Going straight to the source of understanding Kant's philosophy.
Yep. Thanks, Fendi. for interrupting.
Yeah. All right. So what I was saying though is it's interesting how you were able to almost just directly go to St. John of the Cross, right? You understood what that says. I understand it now. I really do feel as if I have got the exegetical message that is there. That wasn't easy. Like we really struggled with that, right? We went in, and I think we talked about how when something is not directly written, right, and it almost feels like there's a roundabout. St. John of the Cross definitely has a roundabout way of speaking, right?
Yeah.
It just puts my feelers up, my little antennas up, and it makes me just vet what I'm taking in, and like we said, like saints have been vetted by the Catholic Church, right? So you should trust them, but like it's like we talked about in general the idea of a meme, right? Being not a picture with a caption underneath it, but what it was originally meant to be, which is an idea that has a replication value, right? And not all ideas are from God, all good ideas are from God, right? And then some bad ideas tag along with other ideas, right? You might say they parasitize good ideas and they Trojan horse their way into people's minds, right? And you kind of want to make sure that you pay attention to everything coming in, right?
Right. Which is a huge thing. Like we teach our students, like ask questions. Don't just accept everything that you're being told.
Right. I think I did the due diligence to that, and it checked out good. I didn't think it wouldn't, because St. John of the Cross is a very beloved saint in the Catholic Church, right? And not only that is that I've read other people who aren't even in the Catholic Church, like Carl Jung, who has wrote extensively on St. John of the Cross, which is why I knew of him. Yeah. I knew very second to third hand, they're writing on him, and you could just see that there's something there, right? Although when you read that paragraph, you could just go, wow, that sounds like a bit of gibberish.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like you're sounding very complicated to be complicated. Although there is meaning in it.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe the difficulty of reading is intentional.
Yeah.
Almost like it's a keepsake of like you have to actually put a little bit of a sacrifice. You got to learn Spanish in order to understand this.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is sacred. So don't just think you can just go and poach it, take the ideas, take the memes out of it.
And it did stop us for a long time to talk about it. Because, I think more than anything else we've read, we stopped to talk about, what does this actually mean? What is he trying to say? Yeah. For a long time.
Oh, I don't think we've stopped on any point in this book so far. Yeah. In the 30 pages we've read.
Yeah.
More than that one paragraph.
Yeah.
Because it was really difficult. I mean, he uses the word it a lot. Yeah. Which is very vague. That's very difficult in of itself. But when you substitute the word soul when he says it.
Right. Yeah.
There's a little bit more comprehension that comes along with that. Maybe it would have sounded really redundant if you kept going the soul, the soul, the soul, the soul.
Sure, yeah.
And it was a little bit more maybe how it translated. But let me read what JP2 said as far as his exegesis of what he got from that.
Right.
I think this was in paragraph 2, right?
Yeah.
And the will gives to the beloved through love nothing less than that which it had received from him, the gift of participated divinity. Hence the soul gives God to himself as though himself, because the motion of the Holy Spirit is continuously transformed. Right? I hope I read that right.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're gonna say?
Well, I love the idea of God wanting us to share in his divinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that people have a hard time with that because, I don't know, maybe it gets a little too Mormonism when you start talking about like
Yeah,
us
like you get
becoming
your own
gods or
planet. Yeah,
whatever.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's truth, and it's actually one of my favorite prayers in the Mass is like, I don't, the priest doesn't even say it out loud sometimes, but when he's mingling the water and wine,
Yes.
he will literally say, by the mingling of this water and wine, may we share in the divinity of Christ.
Yep.
And like, that's the whole point, that, not the whole point, but it's a huge reason he became human.
You know what's funny? I often find that priests will mute their mic when they're saying that. Yeah. And sometimes if you're close enough to the front, you get to hear it. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Which I don't know, it's like my favorite part.
Yeah.
Keep your mic on. But I love that idea because I think it speaks a lot to how much God loves us.
Mm-hmm.
And in like such a, like, I know that he is our Lord, he is our master, and he is higher than us. But he also like does want to bring us up into his royal family.
Yeah.
And like he wants to be one with us.
Yeah.
Which requires divinity in us.
But that's funny because when we were reading, I think you fell asleep, but I think you were there for this part. When we were reading Father Jacques, Jacques Philippe, not Lamarck, Jacques Philippe, and he said something, and like we said, and maybe it was a translation thing, but it's kind of funny to say what God can't do.
Right.
You know? And he says that God doesn't know how to not love us. And I was just like, that is a conundrum there. It's like when they say, can God create a rock too heavy for him to lift?
Right.
Right? It's like, I think the answer is more God wouldn't create a rock in that way. Not that he couldn't. He wouldn't, because maybe a responsibility God feels that. I don't know.
I mean, it goes against his nature.
Right.
So like to not love us is impossible for God to do because that is who he is.
Oh, I almost feel like it's the other way around. I almost feel like God easily could not, but he wouldn't ever. And
but he couldn't not. Because if he were to not, then he wouldn't be God.
Create then.
He wouldn't be God anymore.
Well, he wouldn't be all benevolent God.
He wouldn't be who he says he is.
Right, exactly.
And then everything would be untrue.
Well, that's why omnipotent and all benevolent they're very difficult to have at the same time. And that's a big mystery of God, right? Is how he is at the same time. Right? But I almost feel like, well, the point I was trying to make, because like although that's a very difficult understanding of saying something that God can't do.
Right.
Interpreting it as he could not love us but wouldn't ever do it is where your faith lies in him, is that you know that God has the power to do anything, but he would never not love you. Right? And then I was explaining the whole thing about like our children one day, right? And how like the fact that we would have obviously like power over our children, right? But that every decision we'd make would be for the best of our children, right? And that's something that Father Jacques Philippe was saying, was I think in the idea of like a king or a leader of a group or something like that, is that there's such a responsibility to perpetually choose to love those that you lead, right? And it's like, could I use my power for something negative? It's like, of course I could, but I want to make sure that the people I lead, the children that I raise, know that I could, but I never would.
But then you wouldn't be who you wouldn't be a good leader anymore. A good leader cannot do evil.
I don't think that's true.
Because then they would be a bad leader.
I think that's the idea behind meekness, right? Is the original definition is somebody who has a sword but keeps it sheathed. Right? I think it's necessary.
But somebody could be meek and use the sword when needed.
Sure, but I think the idea of power is something that there's a necessity that it can be used for evil, but the choice and the responsibility to not do that makes you a good leader. The thing is, if you couldn't, like let's say that you had a leader that couldn't fail. It's like, all right, whatever. You can't fail.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Like a parent that couldn't help but love. It's like, okay, well, sometimes it's hard to love, you know? Sometimes you have to actually work at being able to continue to love your children.
Sure. But going back to God, because obviously, like, all of these are like hypotheticals that like are true. Obviously, you can be a good parent, still do bad things.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make you a bad parent. But God himself, he, even like the way that he loves us, like he chooses the ways that he loves us. He chooses how he created us and whether he like wanted to create like me and you as individuals. But once he's created us, he doesn't. But it's almost like impossible to think. It's not like God can't do the impossible, but you're saying something that is exactly impossible.
Well, it's not logically impossible. Like, it's not like saying like a complete vacuum that also has particles in it, right? Like that's just a contradiction, right?
Right, which is the same as God.
But there's also the thing is, this is why I think it's a mystery. I leave it as a mystery. But I also think that God, if he has the power to do anything, right? I think it means so much more that he loves us, being that it's his choice to love us, as opposed to, well, he couldn't do anything but that.
But don't you think true power doesn't come from just like wielding it and choosing your own good, but it comes from doing. So if he were to do something against his nature, then it would actually be yielding his power.
Sure. I have to say, like, I don't think that God is bound in that kind of logical grip, right? Between like, well, like what are we holding you to it right now? Like you're either all powerful, and then the second you use it, you're not all good now. It's like I don't know.
No. He does use his power, but I think the way that we understand power, and I think you brought up a good point about meekness, is we often think that meekness and power are different. They are clashing. But
it's the potential to use the power.
But it is a power. It is a power to know when to use force or strength.
Sure.
Or when
but still have the capacity to.
Right. But God uses his power. So he uses his power. He knows when he needs to turn someone into a pillar of salt, and he knows when he needs to bring someone out of a big fish. Like, he uses his power. But I think to go against who he is would be him to give over his power to something greater, which is impossible because there is nothing greater.
Right. But I think the question was it a translational error? Or was he actually saying that God does not have the power to not love us?
It is, the way that it was written was interesting because it was like he doesn't know how to.
He doesn't know how to.
It is weird.
Right? Now he's not omniscient, right?
Yeah.
I think he knows how to. I think that God has the capacity to stop loving us. he has the capacity to know how to not love us. And I think that goes into the same idea in a relationship of, you know what, you're not better off not knowing how to hurt the other person. You know, you're not better off like going, well, I'm just blissfully ignorant. I just I have no clue what hurts this person. You should know how the person could be hurt and actively avoid those things. And that's love, right? Like, I think this book, I just reread it again. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And they talk about how, you know, you'll go to a savanna, right? And there'll be a watering hole. And zebras and lions will be right next to each other drinking water. And you go, wait a second, no. Like, aren't they arch enemies? Isn't the lion just going to pounce on the zebra at any time? So the thing is that like, the lion doesn't want to hurt the zebra. That sounds so strange to say. The lion really does not want the zebra suffering.
Yeah.
You know, that is absolutely not the MO of the lion. The lion wants to eat. You know, the zebra is just like...
he doesn't just hurt the zebra to hurt the
Right,
zebra.
it doesn't hurt just to hurt it. Human beings are the only organisms that hurt other organisms and themselves because they know how they can hurt them. Because they have the power to, because they know that what hurts me hurts you. You know, and I think that to say that like you don't know how to means that maybe you accidentally don't love the person. Maybe you accidentally hurt the person.
Yeah. I don't think it's a power. I think it's a weakness. To hurt somebody is acting on a weakness and not to use the power that you have to love somebody.
It is a knowledge, though.
It is a knowledge, though.
But the point was that it was
one's
a
up
knowledge.
In the air. Yeah. I'm not sure about the knowledge.
I think God absolutely knows how to stop loving us.
Yeah, he knows how to hurt us.
He knows how to hurt us.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that he's a God based off of fundamental truth, and he's a God that's based off of love, and a God that wants the best for his creation, I think it's so much more to a testament that he knows how to stop loving us, how to hurt us, and that he doesn't. It's so much more of I feel so much more loved by God because of that.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point where in the book of Exodus, at one point, God wants to just like kill all the Israelites because they're not listening. And Moses advocates for them and says, no, don't do it. And they talk about like God being angry and everything. And then God doesn't do it.
Right.
And I think there's a truth to the fact that he can do things. He knows how to do things. But I think it also is a testament to how we're called to be a vessel of God's love to each other and advocate for one another, even to God. But I don't know if it's because he actually would hurt us. I don't think.
Right. No, absolutely.
But maybe because we wouldn't receive his love otherwise. Because I think there is a lot of love and grace that we don't receive from God.
I absolutely agree. I think that comes along with like ideas of like corporal punishment, right? Where I think there is almost this feeling of like if you get off like unscathed, you can't receive it, right? Where sometimes people just want to go like not with like children, but like with like two guys, let's say, and like let's say that like when you're kids, you know, like let's say that you like I don't know, like you went too far and you actually hit somebody, right? And then there's almost this like idea of like, all right, they get one shot back at you, right? And you take it because you feel worse that you hurt your friend.
Yeah.
You know? And like I know like they hurt your back, but the thing is that like there is this almost this sensation of like I don't feel good about getting off the hook.
Right.
The same thing about getting things for free. I think like people like love getting free stuff now. And it's like, do you really want something for free? don't you, like, somebody made something and it was like artisanal, right? And they go, like, they give it to you, and that's nice. But versus like you haggled with them and they practically gave it to you at that point. It's like, man, they worked hard for that, you know? And
right.
like, you should want to pay them,
Yeah.
right? Because there is that reciprocal value that comes across there. And obviously the violence example is probably not the most Christian way of looking at that.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that is a lot of Christians I think one of the biggest reasons we have a hard time receiving God's love is because we feel like it's unbalanced. Because not just because we haven't done anything to deserve it, but because the opposite, we've done a lot of things to not deserve it.
Right.
And I think we try to make up for the fact by apologizing to people or by doing good things. And I think that we should feel that tension of getting off the hook for things. And I think that we should just, because otherwise we'll drive ourselves crazy trying to figure out how do we, obviously there are certain things like it's good to have consequences.
Yeah.
But sometimes you do get off the hook for things that you can't fix. Like whether it's somebody that you hurt and then you move schools and you never see them again or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to go out and find them and make amends.
And I think that's when people try to pay it forward or something like that. It never feels like it completes it.
Right. Like we should be paying forward not because of the things we did wrong, but because of the good things that God has done for us.
Yeah.
Like everything we should give, which goes back to the first conversation about God giving himself to us.
Yeah.
Everything we give should be what God has given us.
Yeah.
Not out of,
or at least
trying to make amends.
At least an attempt to possibly give back to God, which is giving to the least of those, you know?
Yeah.
What he's given to us.
Yeah.
It's like good.
Pretty heated today.
It was a good one.
You could see that obviously as we continue to read this, there's still so many things. God is a mystery. And there are so many answers we don't have. And it's just good to read through it and talk about all those things.
Yeah. I love being able to fine tune the conversations by going 5 pages at a time.
Yeah.
You know, there's so, I think this book can be read quickly. And I think this book can be read slowly. And I think this book can be studied.
Yeah.
And I think it ought to be studied.
Yeah. And 3 years later, it will be studied.
Yep. 3 years later, once we finish the podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on our 5th episode. We hope to see you again next time when we pick up on page 30.
Yes. And the lights won't be dimming. The sun won't be setting next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows where we'll be?
Who knows? We might not be in this room.
All right. Well, have a great evening, everybody.